That moment when John was murdered, when did you hear it? Who told you? When did you hear that had happened?
This entire half hour will be devoted to the murder of John Lennon, ex-Beatle, one of the best-known musicians and most influential people of his time.
For over 40 years, the world has continuously judged Paul McCartney's reaction to John Lennon's death.
The death of a man who sang and played the guitar overshadows the news from Poland, Iran, and Washington tonight. Former Beatle John Lennon, who was 40, was shot and killed last night outside his luxury apartment in New York.
And yeah, it was very difficult. Yeah. I mean, it was very difficult for everyone. That was like a really big shock, I think, in most people's lives. It's a bit like Kennedy.
But behind that chilling silence lies a devastating hidden side that has never been brought to light. It was a single, careless moment in front of the camera that plunged the former Beatles member into a lingering sentence on his reputation. Was it the indifference of a cold-blooded person, or a defense mechanism pushing a great man to the brink of a mental breakdown? Now, in his twilight years, Paul McCartney has decided to break down the fortified wall to announce the entire truth.
When the Beatles broke up, a lot of the talk was that, like, I was the villain and that John and I didn't really get on well.
The following authentic documentary materials will dissect the moment that changed music history forever, which you have never heard before. The relationship between Paul McCartney and John Lennon has always been the focus of international media. In the early 1970s, the breakup of the Beatles sparked a tense legal battle. Paul decided to file a lawsuit against the remaining 3 members in court to protect his musical rights. This action immediately pushed Paul into a state of complete public isolation. The peak of the rift was manifested through deeply personal attack tracks. John Lennon released the song "How Do You Sleep" to directly ridicule his former close friend.
How do you sleep at night?
For many years, the press continuously portrayed them as sworn enemies. The public believed that the friendship between the two British music giants had completely ended. Nevertheless, subsequent historical documents proved a completely opposite reality when John went through his lost weekend period. This was the time when John temporarily separated from Yoko Ono and moved to live in Los Angeles. Right during John's most severe crisis, Paul proactively took secret steps toward reconciliation. Regardless of past tensions, Paul McCartney secretly flew to Los Angeles to visit his close friend. Here, he not only soothed old wounds, but also played the role of a mediator. Paul made efforts to reconnect the fracturing relationship between John and Yoko Ono. Paul's sincere intervention helped John successfully reunite with Yoko in 1975. From that moment on, the relationship between the two leaders of the Beatles entered a healing phase. They chose to keep this communication hidden from the prying eyes of the media. Decades later, through the Penguin podcast program, Paul revealed for the first time the hidden psychological corners of John. Behind his defiant facade, John Lennon actually carried a deep insecurity. In a moment of vulnerability, he looked directly at Paul and expressed his anxiety. John emotionally asked Paul whether the world would remember and love him if he passed away. In response to that insecurity, Paul immediately reassured his friend with a firm assertion, "People love you, and they will love you even more than that." That assertion was not only a consolation, but also proof of the sacred emotional bond between them. Even though they no longer stood on the same stage, their mutual understanding never fully disappeared. Paul later choked up remembering this period and admitted it was the greatest comfort of his life. He shared directly with the press, "I feel incredibly lucky that we managed to say words of reconciliation before it all ended." That peace of mind was the only thing that kept him standing strong. That relationship, just mended by a simple thing, seemed poised to open a new chapter for both leaders of the Beatles. But no one could have anticipated that those would be the final sweet memories before a cruel fate struck on a cold winter night in New York. The pain that became the scandal. December 8, 1980 became one of the darkest milestones in global music history. Outside the Dakota Building in New York City, ruthless bullets from the madman Mark David Chapman took the life of the legend John Lennon. This shocking news immediately crossed the Atlantic to reach England early the next morning.
Witnesses told police Lennon was shot near the door to his apartment building as he and Yoko Ono returned from a recording studio.
In the Sussex countryside, Paul McCartney was awakened by an urgent phone call from his manager, officially announcing the death of his close friend.
I was at home and I got a phone call. It was early in the morning, I was in the country, and I just got a phone call.
Paul McCartney's first psychological reaction upon hearing the terrible news was a complete cognitive paralysis. His entire surroundings blurred and his mind immediately froze. Just like the moment he received the news of the assassination of US President, the sudden loss made it impossible for the musician to immediately accept the brutal reality before his eyes. He fell into a state of severe shock, his body losing all sensation upon learning that the teammate who had been close to him throughout his youth had laid down forever in a pool of blood in New York. Amidst the brewing media chaos, Paul made a decision that caused great controversy among the public. Instead of choosing to go into hiding at his private residence to grieve or avoid public opinion, he immediately moved to the familiar Abbey Road recording studio. Here he reunited with the remaining two members of the Beatles' Ringo Starr and George Harrison. They sought each other out in a closed space to face the greatest event of their lives together without outside interference. Explaining this unusual action, Paul McCartney later confided directly to international reporters, "We couldn't just sit at home. We needed to be around familiar people and we needed to make music. That was the only way to survive." Burying himself in instruments and professional work was seen as the male singer's psychological defense mechanism. For artists, music is the only language that helps them take refuge from overwhelming emotional traumas. Nevertheless, the real tragedy for Paul's reputation occurred the moment he stepped out of the studio building. A large crowd of reporters was already waiting, pointing a barrage of microphones and cameras at his face to hunt for sensational statements. In a state of physical and mental exhaustion due to the immense shock, Paul was no longer lucid enough to choose his words carefully. Amidst the chaotic surrounding of the press, he accidentally uttered a brief response that changed the landscape of public opinion. The musician let slip 3 English words that were incredibly dry and cold. "It's a drag, isn't it?" This spontaneous remark was immediately captured in its entirety by the television network's camera systems. The clumsy expression during a moment of panic immediately turned into the worst media crisis of the century. Those 3 brief words were quickly broadcast widely, igniting a fierce wave of outrage from the global public. Numerous investigative reports accuse Paul of having absolutely no sympathy for his brutally murdered friend. The old animosity between the two from the period of the band's breakup was once again dug up and exploited to heighten the sensationalism. The ruthless wave of public criticism pushed Paul into a dark corner of isolation. In the middle of the media storm, while the entire world viewed him as an unfeeling person, Paul's true collapse occurred in silence, beginning with a completely unexpected melody: Late Tears. Moving into 1981, the psychological pressure weighing on Paul McCartney became increasingly intense and harsh. Following severe criticism from international public opinion, the former member of the legendary band The Beatles officially fell into a state of profound inner crisis. The musician admitted he was completely empty and had fallen into a state of numbness deep inside. The pain of losing his great soulmate had not subsided, which, combined with the heavy pressure from articles criticizing his unfeeling attitude, pushed him into isolation. For a long time after the funeral, Paul was completely unable to shed a single tear in front of the public or his family. An overly strong psychological defense mechanism caused the superstar to lock away all emotions, silently bearing the ruthless judgment of the world. An unexpected turning point for emotional release appeared in late 1981 when country music legend Carl Perkins visited Paul at the studio. He wanted to share the grief with his colleague by composing and dedicating a special song with a deeply nostalgic title. During that intimate meeting, Carl Perkins personally held his guitar and performed the song titled My Old Friend. As the first gentle melodies resonated, the deep lyrics began to touch the darkest hidden corners of Paul's soul. The shocking moment occurred when Carl Perkins sang the line about what would happen if the two never met again in life. The lyrics telling the old friend to think about him every now and then immediately created an incredibly powerful psychological effect. Right when he heard those words, Paul McCartney suddenly stood up from his seat to everyone's astonishment. All the long-held suppression completely shattered, he sobbed uncontrollably and immediately rushed outside. This sudden action left Carl Perkins extremely bewildered and worried, fearing he had accidentally touched upon the pain. Amid the suffocating silence of the recording studio, Linda McCartney, Paul's wife, proactively stepped forward to clarify the situation. Through choked-up tears, Linda embraced Carl and revealed a wondrous spiritual truth behind that intense reaction. She stated that the lyrics Carl had just sung matched astonishingly with an invaluable historical memory. According to documentary materials from the family during the final face-to-face meeting between Paul and John Lennon before the assassination took place, John performed an affectionate gesture by gently patting his close friend's shoulder before they parted ways in New York. Right at that historic, fateful moment, John Lennon looked directly into Paul's eyes and uttered a mysterious, final parting phrase. The verbatim quote from the leader of the Beatles at that time was exactly, "Think about me every now and then, my old friend." The most incredible thing recorded by the press was that Carl Perkins had absolutely no knowledge of this final private statement. The fact that he accidentally wrote identical lyrics became a special spiritual phenomenon, helping to unburden Paul's mind. Thanks to the miraculous emotional release from Carl Perkins' story, Paul McCartney rediscovered his lost creative inspiration. Moving into 1982, during the production of the album Tug of War, he decided to write a farewell song titled "Here Today." This musical piece was structured as an incredibly moving fictional dialogue between two grown men. Through the somber notes, Paul officially confronted the things that during their impulsive youth they had never dared to express, frankly. The song was where Paul entirely cast aside all barriers of superstar pride to cry and admit his deep affection. Within the piece, the artist choked back tears to deliver a direct confession to his late friend, "I really love you." That farewell song helped Paul relieve some of the pent-up pressure, but the emotional wound was far too large to heal overnight. To survive through the following years, Paul was forced to choose to build a wall of silence to lock away the pain. 4 decades of running away. After the shocking event of 1980, Paul McCartney entered middle age with an emotional wound that could not be soothed. In an exclusive interview in the prestigious The New York Times magazine, Paul admitted for the first time that he had lived in a state of denying reality for many decades. He chose the path of avoidance to protect his mind from the overwhelming shock of the brutal assassination years ago. The former member of the Beatles explained that whenever his mind accidentally replayed the scenario of the night gunfire erupted at the Dakota Building, all his inner consciousness immediately fell into a standstill. The absurdity and the savage nature of the perpetrator's crime made it impossible for him to accept. This reality avoidance syndrome became the only protective shield safeguarding the British musician from the risk of a severe mental breakdown. The only way that helped Paul continue to live and dedicate himself to art was forcing himself to temporarily forget the entire sequence of the ruthless shooting. Precisely because of this psychological defense mechanism, Paul McCartney established an extremely strict boundary with the international media. Throughout the 1990s, he resolutely refused to participate in in-depth interviews that sought to delve deeply into John Lennon's tragedy. This tendency to evade continued through the 2000s, when a succession of film studios proposed to execute documentary film projects about the Beatles. The artist flatly rejected these lucrative offers, unswayed by the pressure to hunt for sensational information from major broadcasting networks. Paul's firm decision stemmed from his supreme respect for the soul of his late friend and the Lennon family. He expressed his personal stance decisively, "I hate turning the personal tragedy of my life into an entertainment show for the masses." His steadfast attitude before the press created a wall of silence that enveloped half the life of a legend. For Paul, continuously dredging up the bloody memories of that December night in 1980 brought no healing value, only exacerbating the trauma. Nevertheless, behind the coldness and firmness displayed before the media lenses, Paul still silently endured the pain in his own way. Subsequent investigative report materials revealed a deeply moving secret habit of his whenever he had the occasion to return to New York City. Whenever his work schedule forced him to travel through the Manhattan area, Paul always requested his driver to pass by a special location. That was the Frank E. Campbell funeral home where John Lennon's body was taken immediately after the horrific assassination years ago. Throughout the decades that passed, the former member of the Beatles never once actually stepped inside this funeral home. Directly confronting the space that held the final mournful memories of his close friend remained too great a challenge for him. Instead, the musician chose an incredibly solitary and quiet method of communication from inside the car. Whenever the vehicle passed by the glass windows of the Frank Campbell funeral home, he always fixed his eyes inside with absolute solemnity. This solitary act took place regularly over decades, transforming into a private spiritual ritual between the two legendary leaders. It proved that even if Paul tried to run away from the media, the shadow of John Lennon was always present in his mind anywhere and at all times. Moving into the early years of the 2010, fans began to notice a gradual shift in the elderly musician's attitude. The long passage of time had somewhat softened the sharp edges of the loss, preparing for a peaceful new chapter in the final stage of his life. That fortified defensive wall had shielded Paul for over half his life, resisting the prying questions of the press. Even so, as time went by and the ghost of the past gradually receded, the late confessions and the understanding from subsequent generations truly brought a satisfying answer: exoneration from the sun. Entering the new decade, Paul McCartney has officially entered his 80s. This is the time when the veteran artist begins to face the finitude of life while looking back at his entire turbulent past in a more forgiving manner. Press interviews in recent years no longer carry an atmosphere of tension or avoidance of public opinion as before. The international media notes an unprecedented attitude of openness, calmness, and willingness to share from the former member of the legendary band, the Beatles. A key highlight in the process of public exoneration for Paul occurred when the documentary film Paul McCartney Man on the Run was released. This cinematic work dissected many historical hidden corners and previously unpublished documents about his life. In this special documentary film, John Lennon, the son of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, made a surprise appearance. He proactively spoke out before the media lenses to offer a fair perspective, officially defending Paul against the harsh wave of criticism from years past. John Lennon candidly analyzed Paul McCartney's psychological state and voice during that fateful moment in December 1980. He asserted that the public at that time had completely misunderstood the British musician's spontaneous defensive reaction. Recalling the shocking event of that year, John Lennon emotionally shared directly with international television filmmakers, "I looked at his eyes and his voice at that time. That was a person who was a complete robot due to psychological shock, not cold-blooded. I understand the feeling when something terrible strikes." The invaluable assertion from the victim's own son immediately shattered all doubts lingering for over 4 decades. The Western press collectively evaluated this as a late exoneration, but one holding immense historical value for Paul. The peace of mind of the elderly musician was even more clearly depicted through the latest documentary writings. In the biographical book titled Wings, The Story of a Band on the Run, Paul McCartney dedicated several chapters to raw self-reflection. Through these pages, Paul admitted that to this day, he still has not been able to completely accept that monumental loss. He candidly wrote that, to be honest, he himself did not want to accept the brutal truth of John's death. Publicly admitting his vulnerability and feeling of helplessness before the historical tragedy showed that Paul McCartney was no longer running away from reality. He accepted living with the past pain as an inseparable part of his own journey of maturing and growing old. By 2026, in the twilight years of one of the world's greatest music legends, Paul has found true peace. The tormenting obsessions or animosities from the harsh media wars of the past have now completely receded deep into the bygone days. Instead of looking back at December 8, 1980 with mourning and grief, Paul chooses to recreate beautiful memories. He focuses on preserving the image of a genius John Lennon full of energy and with a radiant, youthful smile in the old city of Liverpool. In a recent television broadcast, the former member of the Beatles made an emotionally charged official statement. "Now when I think about John, I no longer see tragedy. I see laughter. I see music. I see the best parts of us back then." The postlude of Paul McCartney's life at the present stage is filled with reconciliation, love, and immortal melodies. His late confessions not only close a media scandal of the century, but also affirm the eternal value of friendship. The historical tragedy of 1980 has concluded, but the friendship and musical legacies of the two giants of the Beatles endure. The truth behind Paul McCartney's 3 fateful words has been brought to light after over 40 years of enduring the ruthless acts of public opinion. If you appreciate authentic and profound journalistic materials about music legends, please click the like and subscribe button today. Do not forget to turn on notification bells so you do not miss our next exclusive investigative reports.